Welcome to Catch Outdoors, presented by the Waypoint Podcast Network at waypointtv.com. I'm your host, Captain Rob Modies, reporting to listeners each and every week from the fabulous Florida Keys. You can order my books at catchoutdoors.com or on Amazon Kindle. Books from my website are, however, signed while they last. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it may be, wherever you are. Before I jump into this week's podcast, a quick fishing report. Finally got back out on the water. There was a real problem with wind. Then there was a little issue with guests, which was last week's podcast, which was fun. Traveled all over the Florida Keys, visiting and looking at stuff, and actually going to a couple places I've never been to before. And then a cold. Not COVID, thank goodness, but bad enough. I still have the sputters, and I will apologize for that today. And I'm recording this. I have a home studio, for those that don't realize where this happens. This isn't like going to a radio station where you're boxed in concrete and nobody can make any noise. This is a house. So some people say, there's stuff in the background every night. Yeah, there sure is. There can be trucks, birds, doors shutting and opening. My wife is in her office right next door, so you just never know what we're gonna run into. That's what makes it entertaining, I think. Anyway, fishing. Past Thursday before the latest front blew in. Nothing real special about the day. I caught the usual barracudas, which are always fun in my book. Also, 2 lizard fish. That was a first. For those of you that don't know about the old lizard fish, they populate grass flats, which is what made it unusual where I was in the area that I fish in Key Largo. Was mostly sand, sandy bottom, marl, hard bottom. I'm searching for bonefish is what I'm doing. Didn't find any. Didn't even see any. Saw some sharks. But the lizardfish were kind of weird. It was like, oh, hi, lizardfish. How cool. Which makes me think back to a story many, many, many years ago in the Keys. There was a tournament called You Fat Bastard. I don't know where the name came from, and I don't care, so don't get all upset, but that's what it was called. Had T-shirts for it. You had to catch a tarpon and a lizardfish. The tarpon would not count unless you had the lizardfish. So you would see the guys on the grass in the back, about midway up Florida Bay, fishing like crazy if they had a listable, a legit tarpon. They were back there trying to get the lizardfish, and I always thought that was funny as all get. I never fished in the tournament. I just heard about it, and it's kind of like I think it's called the one fly tournament, where you're allowed to fish for whatever the tournament length is, 7 or 8 hours with one fly. And if you lose it, you're done. So that's another one. And they had, there's categories for fish and stuff. I've always thought the one fly was a great idea because, excuse me, told you that was going to happen. Because it was just, imagine that. You have to do some wire sometimes. You got to do things to protect it, heavy leader, because if you lose the fly, it's over. And the object is really to go as long as possible and catch as many of the listed species as possible. So anyway, I believe the one fly is still going on. I'm going to have to look that one up. But that was a pretty big Keys deal down here. So anyway, I had a pretty good time out there. I saw a huge sea turtle. Lord, 150, 200 pounds, easy. Went right under the kayak. He was monstrous. Head like a coconut, just really a big one. So that was exciting. And again, I saw lots of sharks and lots of kudas and caught quite a few kudas, but no sharks, and didn't have any fun at all with bones. They weren't playing. However, I did some wade fishing on a flat. That was the first. I got up into the back of Largo Sound, and there's just this beautiful flat back there. And I was able to anchor the kayak up, hop out, and throw some stuff around. And I don't know, it was for me, it was as much fun just to look around and to see what was out there as it was to be hunting for fish. It's just a beautiful area. Anyway, let's see. Maybe next time, on the bonefish. I hope so. I'm going to make that a go-to spot, though, on every single trip when I go out there. It's just too pretty to pass up. And this week's episode is number 72, The Good Old Days. Okay, so the title's a tiny bit misleading, but not really. I was sorting and messing around with some of my old tackle and hunting for something I haven't used in a long while. And then as I was hunting, I found a few other items I'd forgotten about, and that led me to this week's podcast about old fishing gear and, you know, lures and reels and rods and the like, and including some other odds and ends I found in a box. A few weeks ago, I mentioned Lovelers and how they were a thing a long time ago to me. It was a tandem rig with soft plastics, little jig heads. You cast them out, mostly for sea trout. But that's actually what got me started in the hunt. I put the idea in my head about using old standby lures and soft plastics, things like that. So, and then it blossomed into other gear, which is, yeah, that's fishing. And the other gear was unusual. So I'm going to go through this because I haven't looked at it in years, but it became an integral part in my becoming a captain. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to go through this for myself as well as for you all, just to see if you've even heard of any of these strange and unusual navigation instruments way before GPS. First thing I found was an old knot tying tool. That's what led me in the direction that belonged to my grandfather. It's a little tough to describe. It's made of brass, fairly heavy. It had like a clamp on the top, like a mousetrap clamp, and then there was a center pin in the middle that stuck out, a point actually, a sharp tip. And it was designed, it came with directions, but basically you flip the lever over and then you can tie lines in different directions. Mostly it looked to me like, according to the directions, it's mostly for tying line to line, which is something we do quite simply today with, you know, Albrights and uni to uni and all kinds of fun knots tying lines together. People use a lot of different stuff to get that accomplished, by the way, nowadays. I guess that's because of the invention of braid. Braid suddenly took knot tying to a whole different level because braid was not as simple as tying mono to mono. Braid was very slippery, small, would cut through mono if you weren't careful how you tied the knot. There were a lot of issues when braid showed up on the scene. So, but this little machine's kind of cool, this little device, and it basically is creating a fisherman's knot. So I laid out the instructions and I put the two lines together. I used mono to mono, because that's really what it was designed to do. And I played around with it, and after, you know, mostly butterfingers at first, but after several tries, it all came together, and it was a remarkable little tool. Basically, you have to picture something where you lay the lines across each other, and then bring each piece back left and right, and then use the device to twist them. So in other words, you're basically spinning the device over and over and over again until you get 7 or 8 twists on both sides, and then you're able to pull these things together, do a last connection through it. I know you can't see this at all. I'm doing this with my hands right now. And, and you pull it tight. It worked. Now for braid, no. I tried it with the braid to mono. It was very clumsy. That's where the butterfingers came in. It just would not work. And there was no name on this thing. So I think at some point I'm going to start taking pictures of these things and throwing them up on the Catch Outdoors Facebook page under the photos. So maybe you can take a look. Yeah, I might just do that. In the same keepsake drawer, I found all of my grandfather's plotting and navigation tools. Okay, so this is going to go on here for a few minutes because this was really, to me, was really cool, and I'm sure to those of you that have boated for quite a while, or even the newcomers, you'll probably find this pretty interesting. So here we go. There was an old, they call them vintage now, so I guess should I use old or vintage? I always say I'm old because I'm rapidly approaching 70. It's funny to be as old people. I think somebody has that on a t-shirt. Okay, so now I'm vintage. I like that. There's a thing called a Dunlap divider. Picture a compass tool that has 2 points. A divider is still used in geometry and other things outside of computer use. It's a tool itself. So picture a compass tool that has 2 points and no place for the pencil. It's what we used to draw circles with when I was a kid. You know, you put the point in the middle, pencils on the outside, and you loop it all the way around. You draw a perfect circle with it because you've got a center hold piece. But you're not drawing arcs or circles with this one. What we're really doing is we're setting points on a chart for available mileage markers. So down in the bottom of a chart, there would be a mileage marker, and it would either be nautical miles or statute miles, and it would show you how far a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles is on this little bar. And that's what these dividers did. You put them on the bar and go, okay, I need to know 1 mile, or I need to know 2 miles, and then you could rotate it around each other. So there's 2 points. Put a point, rotate it to the next point, rotate it, and find out how far the distance is on that chart to your destination. That's pretty much, I mean, GPSs are so easy, but this is why motors get lost when they break. So that's really what it was for, mileage marking. And by the way, I had to learn this stuff to get a captain's license. And I used my grandfather's and my dad's old nav tools. I found, my captain's license, I guess, was, golly, close to 30 years ago. Maybe a little more than that now that I think about it. Anyway, it's interesting that I got to use some of these tools because in captain's class, this was barely GPS was even on the market. They were just talking about military GPS. You couldn't get one in your hands as a civilian. So this was essential. And today, by the way, I did go back and look. Captain's school still requires navigation class that involves these tools, although I think they'll sell them to you. Next, there was a Darlington Correcto course. You can look this one up. Darlington's the name of the company. Correcto course, written all in one word, is what it was called. I couldn't even find this via Google, to be honest with you. I found an ad for it. After multiple Googles, I found an ad in 1951 in Motorboating Magazine. It sold for a whopping $5.95 retail. This was used to solve math problems of set and drift, along with course made good after calculating winds and current. If you know what all that meant, you're doing really great. If you don't, and you boat, you should probably look it up. You really should. Basically, if you're sitting on the water in one place and you're trying to get to another place on water, you have two things fighting you. There's quite a few other things, but the main things that are fighting you are what we call current and wind. So you're going. This is a simple math. Well, I'm not going to do math on this, but from south to north. Okay, so you're in the south position. You're going due north, and that's where you want to go across, like a bay or something like that. And so you are, you're on the chart. You can't just take a boat and go that way unless the water is perfectly still and there is no wind. I mean, that's just simply put. If you got a wind from the east, you're going to get pushed to the left. If you got a wind from the west, you're going to get pushed to the east, to the right-hand side. And you're not going to make your course. If you spot that course, now remember, you can't see where you're going. You're not on one shore looking over it like a lighthouse where you actually have a visible. You're on a horizon with nothing. So that's how these things work. You were able to actually use these tools on a chart at your starting position and say, I want to go here, and it's 35 miles away. What course do I have to make to hit that point? And you put in the other factors. How much current is there, and where's it coming from? What degree on the compass is it? Where's the wind, and what degree on the compass it is? And by factoring these few items, you're able to actually set a correct course, that will put you in that spot. Wow. There you go. And welcome to the captain's license. It's really fun when you do these. Next was a 15-inch parallel rules. These are kind of weird. These are rulers is basically what they are. They're commonly 15 inches, and they're side by side. It's a pair of them, and they are hooked together with a device that lets you slide them. So it's hard to explain. One ruler goes forward, one stays behind, then you bring the other one forward, and so on. It enables you to draw a straight line across a chart on the course that you've been told to use to navigate the previous wind and set stuff. Okay? Parallel rules. Watch old naval war movies, submarine movies, especially submarine movies because they can't see where they're going. It's used by the navigator. You'll see him on a chart working this thing across the chart to draw a straight line. That's parallel rules. I don't know how old these were. They're really pretty. They're like dark black and have brass holders on top. Nothing like today where they're just inexpensive plastic. These things are amazing. I'm not sure how old they were, though. A Davis course plotter. This one's kind of strange, and it's one I never had to use. It dates back to 1980, and this was most likely used by either my grandfather or my dad. I'm not sure which, or both. It's see-through, and you'd lay it on top of the chart to figure course correction, sort of like the Correcto course, but different. It has a nifty converter on its edges for converting nautical miles to statute miles. Pretty handy, because most charts from way back when were only nautical, so you had to convert them to a statute if you're doing like standard mileage. But it's I don't know. It was one of those things I looked at and went, wow, this is crazy. And it's on eBay and it's expensive. People collect these apparently. So I'm sorry, you can't have mine. This is one of my favorite things in the Nav collection. You ready for this? The Director Instrument Single Position Automatic Course Finder and Plotter. That's its full name. Ready? Director Instrument Single Position Automatic Course Finder and Plotter. I love the automatic part. No, it's not, but okay. The literature with this boasts no slips, no slides, no errors. In other words, it won't slip around on top of a chart. It was made by Director Instruments in the early 60s from New Haven, Connecticut, and it's quite the rage on eBay as well. The people are definitely looking for this one because it's so bizarre. I love this thing. It's so complicated. You'd have to have a degree in navigation. Do they actually have those to master this thing? But Lord, it looks good. When you're charting, it looks like you know what you're doing. I guess it's a sort of an impress the friends sort of thing. So pretty cool. Last but certainly not least is a sextant. I saved this for a little after the little break there. The sextant is really, I don't know. I find these things utterly fascinating. I'm very, very lucky to have one, especially an old one. They're used for celestial navigation. Yep, real honest to goodness sextant. It has its own wooden box made out of what looks like cherry. I'm pretty sure this was bought in an antique shop, probably by my father. He liked to collect stuff like that, but it very well could have been my grandfather's. It has the box itself is just beautifully. The box is made beautifully. Dovetailed corners and brass key lock and handle and all that kind of cool stuff on it. The sextant itself is made of solid brass with what they call a silver nav track. That's the way it won't wear out. Plus, it shows through a little viewer. It's hard to describe on this podcast, but I'll do my best. This one was made by William Garrard in Liverpool, England, and dates somewhere from the middle 1800s. I'm not sure if it was my grandfather's or dad's, like I said. Perhaps both of them. I know they've used it, and I learned how to use it. I'm guessing somebody picked it up in a nautical antique shop. Yeah, probably so. And I love those places myself. Oh my gosh, you go in there, all that brass around you, those lanterns, the red and green lanterns, the ship's wheels, the station for forward, full speed ahead, the lever. Yeah, you got to have one of those. Of course you do. Anyway, and old ship's wheels too, of course, that have lots of brass on them. Anyhow, I made a point of learning how to use this, and yes, it works. Of course it does. Stars tend to stay put. I'm sorry, I made my own self laugh. That's one of the cool things about it. I mean, GPS is the same way. GPS works on a satellite that's stationary. The satellite is right where it should be all the time. That's how GPS functions. So just think back 150, 200 years ago when people started using sextants, and it's a whole different, it's basically a horizon instrument. What it does is it picks a thing on the horizon, picks a spot in space above your head, and gives you an idea of where the heck you are. I oversimplify, but that's really what it is. And there are zillions of these out there, and some of them are modern. Some of them are made of lightweight aluminum, so they're much lighter. They are, some are plastic. Some have, they're very basic. And some are like this one, very elaborate. They're made of solid brass with lots of fancy mirrors and things on it. But they all do pretty much the same thing. Here's a really cool tidbit. The Navy didn't stop using sextants for navigation officially until the year 2000. So it ain't, I just find that fascinating. Of course, 2000 is about the time I started playing with the GPS down here in the Florida Keys, the very first handheld Garmin's, which all you could do at that point was put a GPS location in and then go to it. They didn't have a chart. It wasn't like magical overview of the water that you were on. You literally put a GPS location on a chart in that you sometimes had to figure out yourself by long lines and then go to that spot. So, but I thought it was pretty neat. They still teach it, though, in quartermaster classes for the Coast Guard and the Navy. So they still teach how to use a sextant. When you enlist in the Coast Guard or in the Navy and you're going to be a quartermaster, you're still going to take lessons on how to use a sextant. I found that fascinating. I actually found a picture online of a class from 2018 where all the students are standing around looking at the sextants with this total mystery in their eyes. As I said earlier, though, if all electronics fail, you damn well need to fall back on some way to find your way home, right? especially in the middle of that big old ocean. All right, moving right along. Thank you for indulging me for that portion of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed that. We're going to get back to the lure stuff, but we are going to talk a little bit about fishing gear first, and specifically reels and some rods, things like that. Now, I lost a really good friend, believe it or not for me, 16 years ago. All that knew him called him Dino. His real name was Dean Hicks, and he ran one of the best fishing shops in all of Florida. It was called Reels Inc. It was a tackle shop, but was also known for its quality custom fishing rods, some of which were made by his wife, Terry. I have one. It's beautiful, and I'm happy to have it. It was also a top-notch reel repair shop, thus the name. And Dino loved old fishing reels. I mean, he was totally into them. He would find one, he would collect them, he would bring them back, he would tear them down, make them completely usable again. I always marveled at him. And it's kind of neat. He told me, he said he just found them here and there. He'd be traveling. He'd just stop somewhere. He'd go to an old shop. He'd go to yard sales and things like that. When Dino passed away, I was more than just a little bit surprised that the family, I was a lot surprised, gave me a large portion of his antique reel collection. I was more than surprised. I was flattered. I think that's a better word. The promise was made not to sell them, but to eventually hand them down to another collector. And I totally agreed. There are reels of all types in this collection, from early open-face bait casters, spin reels, fly reels, some that are too strange to even classify. I have them in a lighted case, nice glass case for all to see when they visit the house. The interesting thing about this is that no one of them is all that valuable. Terry hung on to most, his wife hung on to most of those in case she wanted to trade, donate, send them to like IGFA museum type stuff. They're that kind of piece. Mine are more like what the everyman used, which means there are a lot of them. There isn't like some rare, oh, this guy made 17 of these reels. There's nothing like that. These reels are not terribly valuable, but to me they are. I mean, because they're cool. They show a history dating all the way back to the 1920s or so of how different reels were manufactured by different people with different ideas. And I really love that, because reels are probably one of the most maligned things in fishing. People have always associated reels originally with this. It holds line. After you cast, it reels a line in. Secondary, a drag system. What a drag system is simply lets the fish run without the reel spinning. That's the idea. So you can apply pressure to that. You can turn it up or turn it down depending on the size of the fish and how much pressure you want to put on. That's pretty much it. But when you look at these different designs in these old reels, you can see where people were going with this, which I find fascinating. It's like, well, this needs to be better. I'm going to make it better. And they did. And they produce it. And so it goes. More importantly, the memories are there when I look at these reels. I imagine that my grandfather probably used many of these on fishing trips long ago. And it gives me a sense of stepping back in those days when I sit and I look at the display. It really does. It's a feel-good thing. And thank you, Dino, and thanks to the Hicks family. I deeply appreciate it. I really do. In the same vein, lures. I've got a collection of those too. Nothing too rare, just those that I found along the way, mostly out of old tackle boxes at yard sales and tackle shows. I picked most of them because I remember using them, or perhaps my dad did, or I found one in my grandfather's tackle box. While tackle inventors come out with new stuff every single year, ICAST is sometimes mind-boggling. There are still some of the old stuff just reimagined. That's really what a lot of this is. And in my case, when you collect lures, the only way you're going to find a valuable one, it has to never been used, still in the box, perhaps with an instruction on the box or a little manual inside. That's your most valuable ones. Those are really hard to find because I don't know about you all. When I get a brand new lure, the first thing that goes in the trash is the box that it came in. So there are those people, obviously, that collected it, and those are quite valuable. I don't have those. That's not how it works. I mentioned the Loveler in earlier podcasts and how it disappeared, but maybe not. You know, when I say the old to new, you will see lures in my collection. You look at this thing, you go, what in the world were they trying to do with this? And then you realize 35, 45, 55 years later, there's a lure out there that looks very similar to it that actually is doing what they were trying to do perfectly. The designs have come along that far. And the Loveler was my example a few weeks ago. I thought, you know, this is a great lure. I'm going to try it. So it seems DOA has something pretty much just like it for sale. I recently received a batch of them. I ordered several of different colors, so I will report on that. I'm going to report to follow. I went ahead and got some. They're called the Deadly Tandem, which is essentially what the Loveler was. It's two soft plastics tied in tandem to each other, and you go fishing with it. And I caught a lot of fish. I caught trout and jacks, snook, redfish, hooked a tarpon. That lasted about 4 seconds. And all kinds of other fish when I used to fish with these things years ago. And so I thought, you know, I'm going to give it a try. So we'll see what happens. Okay, time for a history lesson. Has to do with lures. Those of you who listen to me long enough on podcasts and previously on radio know that I love history lessons. So there's this top water out there. This lure, I absolutely love it. It's called the Zara Spook. And it seems the Spook got its start around 1917 in Pensacola, Florida. I did not know that. It's a Florida lure in a store run by a man named Biggs, B-I-G-G-S. As fishing stories are told, and I'll tell you the story as I've read it, a Greek fisherman named Angelo Cappaduca started hand carving a minnow out of wood. He worked the lure from side to side. He described the movement as the way gals dance at a Saragossa street. Yep, bars and houses of ill repute were located there. The movement of the minnow across the top of the water was key and worked extremely well at catching sea trout. Angelo began carving more and handing them out to other regular patrons at the store. The minnow plug was soon named the Zaragoza minnow. This, again, it wiggles. It's a top water lure. Walking the dog is what some people refer to this thing as. Sometime during the Great Depression, a rep from the Heddon Lure Company out of Michigan made a call in the store in Pensacola. He picked up one of the lures, and soon after, Heddon began making one as well. Believe it or not, some of the monies were paid to the original shop and to the inventor. I was surprised to find that out through research. In the 50s, Heddon started a mission around the plastic transparent lures, so they were converting from wood. And these were referred to as spooks because you could see through them. Soon the company renamed the Saragossa minnow, changed it to the Zara Spook. So there you go. While it was very popular with bass anglers, this is what I always find interesting. It took a while for it to make its way into saltwater tackle boxes. I remember using my first one in salt probably around 1980 while visiting my brother in Cape Coral. At the time, I was living in Kentucky, and I was learning the ropes of bass fishing, and the Spook was part of my arsenal, along with many other hard lures and soft plastics. I soon discovered that snook, redfish, trout, and many other fish would viciously attack Zara Spooks on the surface. However, color selection was very important, along with using them only in the warmer months. So I had to start putting math together. They didn't seem to do so well in the winter, with some exceptions. Trout and ladyfish would attack them then. So there are many lures that begin their lives in freshwater and then slowly gravitated to salt. And that's really important to note. I personally believe that this because the use of live versus artificial in the salt realm was kind of in the way. We use live bait. I mean, when we fished in saltwater, it was all about catching bait, using shrimp, stuff like that. We really didn't play that much with artificials. However, in the freshwater world, thanks to Bassmasters and a lot of tournaments, they use nothing but artificials. They rarely ever use worms and things like that. And so it was basically just, I don't know, osmosis, whatever you want to call it. Those of us that fished fresh for a while and then came back down south of the salt waters brought some of this artificial stuff with us. I know I did. My education in Kentucky was pretty cool, I have to admit. First, there was stream fishing for smallmouth with spinning gear, and the use of artificial crawdads, worms, and even some things that didn't much look like bait, to me anyway, came into play. So in other words, when I started fishing there was not, I didn't go buy worms. I just didn't. People were like, no, you got to use spinners and you got to use this and this, like a rooster tail. Okay, what the heck is a rooster tail? Those of you that are freshwater fish or you want to look it up on the web, look at the rooster tail for sale. I guess it's supposed to be a minnow. I assume it is some kind of swimming little fish, but it's the most ridiculous looking thing. But boy, does it catch fish. I also learned to use soft plastics like worms and crawdads and lizards and all kinds of strange things for bass on the bottom of shallow lakes. That was usually in the cooler or winter months. So I pride myself in slowly bringing these lures to Florida on visits before returning here permanently. To this day, I still look at bass fishing lures for ideas. When I go to Bass Pro, that's probably my best example. They have rows and rows and rows of bass fishing gear. It's called, yeah, I know. Listen to the name of the store. So anyway, so I go there and I go up and down those aisles and I get really good ideas for converting them to salt. Now, in some cases, hooks will rot and fall off, or I should say rust and fall off. But the reality is these new inventions that are typically done for bass are done for an aggressive fish. Bass are not that easy to catch. They have a temperament. They are strong. They live in heavy brush and rocks, and you have to tempt them out. Pretty much what you do with a lot of saltwater fish. And so I tend to take these things and convert them over. And so I have found that it's really, really something that's interesting, and I really enjoy doing it. So to this day, I pride myself in looking at lures on the bass fishing side for ideas. In my mind, the good old stuff is still made by companies like Head and Rapallo and Miralure. And those guys also seriously got their start in bass fishing. A newcomer for me was DOA. It's hard to believe they've been around now since 1988. Went and had to look that one up. Mark Nichols made his first artificial plastic shrimp. He actually had a little plastic fish too called the Terrorize. For some folks that would most certainly be an old lure in my mind. 88. I started using them in 2001 when my guiding career took off and I was tired of paying the price for live shrimp. This was on the west coast of Florida. I don't remember where I read this comment by Mark Nichols. He started his working life as a shrimper in Texas. And I remember reading this, and he said that live shrimp are only good for one fish and perhaps no fish. An artificial can catch fish over and over again. And he was right, and he still is right. The DOA shrimp was my go-to for sea trout, and it worked extremely well. I mean, it worked better than live shrimp. And people would look at you when you said that. I would do seminars and talk about artificial use and why you should use the DOA shrimp, and they'd look at you like, yeah, right, it can't work better than live. It does with most game fish. Not all fish, but most game fish. Here's the deal. You can get hit after hit after hit on a DOA and miss the fish, miss the trout. Oh, I missed him again. Ah, daggone it, he bumped it and I missed it again. If you had done that with a live shrimp, you would have gotten one whack at it, and then you reel it all the way back in and re-shrimp and put it back out there again. There were contests that were held that I kept hearing about where guys were proving the point on DOA, and I enjoyed these stories. It was they would do dinner or beer or both and say, okay, look, you get to use live shrimp for the next hour. I'm going to use this artificial DOA for the next hour. Whoever catches the most fish wins. The other person buys. And invariably the person using live would have to buy, because the person with the artificial shrimp is in the water more, and he's getting more bites, he or she, I should say. And as a matter of fact, the girls did a really great job with DOA. I have to tell you that right now. They have a magic touch, I guess. But it was really weird. It's obvious if you've been out there. And in the world of guiding, shrimp cost a lot. I mean, that is one of your bait is, if you're buying shrimp, that's a cost. Ice is a cost, and fuel is a cost. Those are your three biggies. If you're catching live bait, that's a little different. That lowers the cost, but that's time. So you're still spending time on water trying to get live bait in the well for your customers. So using an artificial shrimp was just the way that I went. I was like, this is really, really great. It really works. To this day, DOA will still score you more sea trout, probably more redfish, and probably more snook, because you're able to keep that line and lure in the water a lot longer than when you're fiddling around with bringing it in, putting another shrimp on, and casting it back out there. You get the idea. There, my lecture for the day is over. Fishing rods. Oh, the first person I knew that built their own rods was my grandfather on my father's side of the family. It made sense. He was way beyond an avid fisherman. It was pretty much his only hobby. As far as I could tell, he liked to build wooden models of sailboats. That's about the only other thing I can really say that he did quite a bit of. But he was way beyond the avid fisherman. He was pretty much his only hobby, like I said, spin fly, lure building, fly tying, rod building, and even tackle box building. Yeah, he did it all. So I have a beautiful tackle box, handmade. Before he passed away in 1986, he built custom rods for myself, my father, and my brother Pete. They're quite special. They're made of very early graphite, cork split handles. They're wrapped like a pro. I mean, I've examined the wrap and I'm just like, wow, he really knew what he was doing. I have mine mounted with an old Mitchell 300 reel, which I just reworked the other day. I took the thing apart and discovered the only thing wrong with it right now is the bail spring is a little loose. And I actually found a place online that sells original Mitchell 300 bail springs. So hallelujah. But I think what I'm going to do once I get the bail spring done, I'm going to take it out with that rod and I'm going to catch a few fish on it just to say that I did it. And for those of you that understand the Mitchell connection, is like your listeners are going, oh yeah, I had one of those. You probably had 2 or 3 or 4 of them. At least somebody in your family did. That was, to me, that is the, I mean, I realize it's not the original spin reel. I have some in my collection, but this thing is really, I mean, it was the beast. It held on for a long time. The 3 of us, myself, my brother, and my dad, later split a large amount of rods and reels after my grandfather passed away. There was also hundreds of hand-tied flies and some very special mementos from his fishing travels. His fly rods ran the gamut from small, lightweight bamboo to big, heavy fiberglass. It's fun to cast them in the yard, but I wouldn't dare toss them anywhere near salt water. And that's a warning to those of you. If you have collectible rods or you've collected one from a grandparent, uncle, aunt, uncle, somebody has passed something down to you, be very cautious. A lot of the early stuff was used in fresh water. Saltwater fishing, they just didn't do it. Just the way it is. And if you put those things in salt, you're probably going to damage it ultimately. No matter how well you wash it or take care of it. So be very leery of that. Most bamboo rods are not really designed for salt unless you specifically ask for one from somebody that makes bamboo rods. The ones that my grandfather had were hand-built by Orvis, one of the oldest manufacturers of fly rods in the U.S., and they're still in business today. The feel of the rod is interesting. That's why I wanted to add it to the podcast. There's nothing quite like casting a bamboo cane rod. It has a flexibility that's extremely hard to imagine unless you do it. If you're a fly fisherman, you know that the timing of the back cast is they're all important. Lifting that line out of the water comes over your shoulder, and then you have to time perfectly when that loop is going to unfold behind you to get the full force of the rod into the line to get it to lay out in front of you, and you have to slow down. That's all there is to it. I'm so used to casting brand new graphite rods that it was really difficult at first when I started playing around with these bamboos. You really have to give them time to release their energy to the back before you can go forward with them. But man, oh man, do they feel good. I can't imagine what catching a fish would be like on one. I'm going to have to visit a freshwater area and give these things a try. Same thing with the glass rods, the fiberglass rods. Folks will tell you that if you just go back and use a glass rod, you'll be absolutely amazed with how it feels. And by the way, most of those can be used in salt. There are many, many saltwater rods made back in the day that were made of fiberglass before graphite became popular. Glass is interesting. It bends like crazy. You put this bow in it where, you're hauling up a big fish on a glass rod. You got the handle in front of you and you're looking straight ahead and the tip is in front of you about 2 feet away. So the whole rod is completely bent over in front. It looks like it's going to snap it in a minute, but it doesn't. That's what's really cool about fiberglass. It's also kind of strange in the sense that it actually, you can feel the bump of the fish even more than you do on graphite. I mean, graphite's very sensitive, especially for bites. But when you're fighting the fish, it's interesting how glass actually feels a little bit better. Now, back into my history, I bought my first fly rod around 1980. I guess that would make it an antique. I don't know. 1980 is a long time ago. You start doing the math and do it on your fingers, you're like, holy cow. To me, 1990 wasn't that long ago. It was. It was a 7'5" weight. It was called the Small Stream. It was made by Orvis. I still have it. It was great for going after smallmouth bass in the creeks of Kentucky and Ohio. And Again, I'm afraid to put it in salt water. Probably wouldn't last a month, but as I've explained before, salt is brutal. I've put it in other podcasts. It's something you need to be very leery of on any gear that you use fishing, including pliers or anything else you might do. You need to wash them thoroughly to make sure that nothing is going to rust or come apart on them. But I love that little rod. Being a 7-foot, it was very short. It was designed to go into small streams. It was designed to be used in the woods where you don't have much of a back cast. You're primarily roll casting. But I caught a lot of fish on that little thing, and that was really one of the very first ones that I personally bought and owned myself, that I didn't inherit or didn't use from somebody else. And I still have it, and I still love it. Yes, it's probably vastly improved. Yeah, probably. So in summary, take a look at that old equipment you might have stashed in a closet or in the garage. There might be some real winners in there, especially when it comes to artificial lures and the such. If you're afraid to use, look for something just like it. You'd be surprised to see how many new lures really are similar to the old stuff. The overall building of the new one will most likely be more attractive, with better hooks and hardware, but still a lot like the old ones that you found in that box and that I found in the box. Just think, about 30 or 40 years from now, this is going to be tough. Try to do this. Z-Man and live target lures will be antiques. I find that kind of funny. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. My podcasts are scheduled for each and every Tuesday. If you enjoyed listening, please tell a friend, leave a review, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for the channel. Catch You Outdoors is presented by the Waypoint Podcast Network and is available on Waypoint and many of your favorite podcast providers. The Facebook page is Catch You Outdoors. The website's waypointtv.com and catchyoutdoors.com. Until next time, get outdoors and enjoy.